question on the importance of heating and what to do about it, I think you can find an answer here. My name is Thomas Nowak. I'm the Secretary General of the European Heat Pump Association. It's my pleasure to open this question or this session on equipment for sustainable heating and cooling, how to accelerate deployment. And I represent the European Heat Pump Association. For us, accelerating deployment is super important because we see a decline that is looking small because it's only 5% over last year, but we had expected 20%. So it's actually much bigger than we thought. And these 20%, in our opinion, would have been necessary to achieve the Repower EU targets. So we'll talk to Paula about that if we are still on track. And we also hear from Timur and Roland on what the international situation looks like. We wanted to do it a little bit more interesting and interactive to you, so we will put two Slido questions up. One Slido questions asks you, do you think that your country is ready to move to clean heat? Do you have the measures in place? Is there enough information about the solutions, etc., etc.? Are there enough installers? So this would be one question I would be curious about, and then we will ask you later, between the first round of questions and the second round of questions, which measures should be taken to move your respective country into a more prepared situation. Let me also thank you to the IEA, to IRENA, to UNEP, and to the French government for hosting this event, for making it truly high level, for allowing us a great networking opportunity to exchange knowledge and experience between seasoned experts and younger folks. It was, I think, quite complex to put this together, especially because of the seniority of all the speakers and other participants, but I'm happy to see that we have managed. We had originally an earlier slot, so maybe you can call yourself the most resilient folks because you still make it up such a long day into a session on the topic of heating and cooling. But without further ado, you have seen the Slido, so please answer that. Let me introduce the panel of speakers. We will start by two introductory speeches, one by Timur Gül. He's the Chief Energy Technology Officer in the IEA. He is really knowledgeable about analyzing both the market development and the policy of the different sectors. He's also the head of the Energy Technology Policy Division. And if you ever need something, an overview on technology, then you have probably come across the Energy Technology Perspective reports, which are really, really a trove of information. So looking forward to listen to you, Timur. And then this will be followed by Roland Rösch. He works for many years. I think that I put you also in for more than 20 years of experience, and I know you pretty much that long, so it must be true. He's the director of the Technology Center of IRENA in Bonn, but he's also frequently to be seen at the different events of IRENA in Abu Dhabi and across the world, and he's also a very knowledgeable person on what can be done in technology. So these two will open the session, and then we will move to a moderated discussion. I'm very happy to see here and to welcome Paula Pinho, who is the director at the Directorate General for Energy in the European Commission. She has this wonderful title. She's responsible for just transition, consumers, energy security, efficiency, and innovation. It's the question for the universe and all the rest, right? So you can answer all. But let me assure you that I know her for quite a long time, and she is really a very seasoned expert with answers to many questions. Then we have here, to my great delight, Enrique Villamediana. He's the Managing Director of Panasonic Heating, Ventilation and Air Conditioning Europe. Okay, you could say just another CEO, but that's not the case. He's really a very knowledgeable person in that field. And what I find more important, Panasonic is among these group of companies that is offering heating and cooling solutions. And what I find remarkable is the system integration focus that you also present. So this whole idea of merging together heating, cooling, and electricity sectors is all accumulating in one person here today on our speech. And then we have Andrea Vogt. And he's also a member of the EHPA board, so I'm very thankful for him to be here. Then we have Andrea Vogt, likewise in the EHPA board, and she has done what I have been doing for a while in a different association. She has been an association head, but she has as much or the same amount of experience actually from other work in the heating and cooling industry, and she's now working for Danfoss as vice president for global public affairs and climate solutions. And she's also very knowledgeable on the refrigeration discussion, as she's part of the member of the Refrigeration and Technology Options Committee, RTOC. They do very difficult to read reports, I think. Yeah. And then we have Marsha Poletti, similarly interesting from the perspective of system integration, because she works for Octopus, where she is the head of European system change. And I would like to have such a title. Don't you want to be responsible for system change? It's a huge burden. But from what I read in your CV, you're perfectly equipped to do that. She has a background in consultancy and work for the UK government, etc., etc. So I'm very looking forward to hear what you have to contribute. And now we are moving out of Europe, and I would like to introduce Chigao Wang. He's the Senior Program Director of the Low Carbon Cities Program, cities being very important players in the energy transition, because they have to do all the work that comes from the pieces of legislation that is happening in Brussels. And he is, I would say he's knowledgeable in looking at zero carbon ready buildings with high energy efficiency. And what I liked specifically is that he also promotes system change in transport, promoting walking, biking, and public transport. I like that. And then we conclude with Hubert Zahn, and we move to Africa, who is the assistant manager in charge of the energy efficiency regulation. And I think he can safely be called an energy efficiency wonk. He told me in the preparation calls that he really wants us to move away from inefficient products. They need to go because we know better, and we should only look at the efficient solutions. And he works in the Ghana Energy Commission and he's an energy transformation expert for that country, but probably he has also insights for the continent. We will close the session with Paul Kellett. He's at the UN. He manages the UN Environment's Global United for Energy Efficiency program, and he promised to me he will make completely unrelated closing remarks to whatever we say here on speech. So you have a task to do, Paul. Good. So you have all answered, 13 people at least. If I count roughly, there's more people in this room, so maybe you want to answer to that. But let's open the stage. Timur, please, can I hand the microphone over to you, and then I'm looking forward to your overview and oversight on what can we do and why are we not doing it faster in terms of energy decarbonization, of course.
Thank you, Thomas. I don't know. Yeah. Good afternoon. Really great pleasure for me to be here to open this session. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to tell you many things new after hearing how many knowledgeable people are in the room, but I'll try my very best with some of the latest work that we have been doing on our end. It's really been a great pleasure, I think, for my colleagues, Chiara and Rafa, who are in the audience here, and everyone at the IEA, to collaborate with everyone on setting up this particular forum and session. My speech has a title that resonates hopefully well with the title of the session, but I would like to start nonetheless with a bit of a broader picture here, and a bit of a daunting news in some ways. Depressing news is a bit difficult at the end of the day to start with depressing news, but I think we also should be clear-sighted on where we are. And this is the latest data that we at the IEA just released last Friday. Where we are tracking every year, we're tracking the progress or not in terms of CO2 emissions. And unfortunately, what we have registered last year, once again, is a record high in global energy-related CO2 emissions, reaching 37.4 gigaton. Of course, there are many different stories here, in particular when it comes to advanced economies where emissions continued their decline, etc. But among sectors, it's at least useful to note that buildings was the only sector to actually see a decline in emissions at the global level, largely attributable to the mild temperatures that we have experienced over the year 2023. So not really progress on the decarbonization side of things, but more of a one-off type of situation when it comes to the temperature situation. This is a setback, of course, once again, unfortunately, but I think it's worth reminding ourselves that this does not mean that the clean energy transition is underway. From our perspective, and we are looking at data at a very granular level, As you all are aware of, we get a lot of data from our governments, but we also collect an enormous amount of data to understand really what's going on in terms of clean energy transitions worldwide. And what we're seeing is that the clean energy deployment that we've been registering over the last couple of years has really helped shaving off substantial amount of additional increase in CO2 emissions. In fact, the emission growth that we are seeing is a bit of a structural slowdown over the last decade or so. It's comparable to a level that, in terms of the rate, that we haven't seen since the Great Depression. So, unfortunately, at the highest level, some sort of daunting news, but this should not mean that we should all get depressed here, but it means we should, if anything, double down our efforts in terms of clean energy technology deployment. Now, coming to the building sector and opportunities to decarbonize buildings, of course, heat pumps are a key technology here. They can efficiently provide heating and cooling. Global heat pump sales grew significantly after the COVID pandemic, driven by strong increases in Europe, China, and the United States in particular. This trend, unfortunately, was reversed last year, at least at a global level. There were inflationary pressures, high interest rates, a slowdown in the construction sector, and policy uncertainties in several markets that have led to that slight decline that we have seen relative to the previous year. When it comes to manufacturing of heat pumps, it's important to recognize that China currently hosts the largest heat pump manufacturing capacity today, followed by the United States and the European Union. But when you look at the plans that have been announced by manufacturers from around the world, then you see that the expansion plans by manufacturers are largest in Europe, which are planning to invest several billions of dollars in the coming years to bring new capacity online. Now, this sounds somewhat promising, at least for the case of Europe, but it's also important to recognize that the slowdown in sales and, of course, has increased uncertainty among manufacturers, that raised fears of oversupply in the short term in some of the regions. This could, as you see here, I mean, if you compare the outlook in terms of manufacturing capacity with the deployment needs that we are seeing towards 2030, to meet each and every region's own target. No, this is not something that we are imposing, but these are their own targets as they are relevant for the country to meet their own long-term emission decarbonization plans. Then we are still miles away. There are still significant investment required in China, United States, and Japan. And of course, in Europe, the uncertainty that we are seeing around some of the key markets means that some of the announced manufacturing plans might actually be revisited in early 2024. We have seen some manufacturers downscaling some of their ambitions here. As I mentioned, heat pumps are one of the key technologies for cleaner heating and cooling, but of course we need a variety of different approaches here, a combination of different technologies, high performance building, changes in the way equipments are used and connected. For reaching net zero emissions by the year 2050, you see here, hopefully better on this slide than on my slide. Yeah, actually much better on that side. For reaching net zero by 2050, final energy use for space heating has to decline by around 2/3, despite an expected increase in heated floor area by around 30%. Final energy use for space cooling must broadly stabilize at today's level for reaching climate goals, despite rising temperatures, as well as increased ownership rates for air conditioners from growing market uptakes in countries where the ownership levels are particularly low today and where the temperature increase is likely to be highest, such as in India or in sub-Saharan Africa. The deployment of highly efficient equipment at scale and the combination of multiple solutions, not only heat pumps, but also district heating, solar thermal, changes in cultural norms and habits, such as changing temperature set points or ventilating appropriately, are all key elements here, and they could shave off final energy use to an extent that you could save roughly of the order of 40 exajoules, which is equivalent to final energy use of the European Union today. What we're doing at the IEA is we're not only releasing the indeed excellent energy technology perspectives reports, thanks for the shout out, Thomas, on that one, but we're also tracking progress in many very different dimensions here. We are, for example, tracking more than 550 different technologies and their readiness levels across the whole energy sector. For buildings, this is freely available on our website. You can explore that in the way you would like to see it. For buildings, this type of analysis shows that the technologies required for net zero by 2050 really already exist. This is not including for heating and cooling, in fact. Of course, innovation is important to advance efficiency, enhance system integration, reduce overall life cycle impacts, reduce costs, etc., as you do for technologies that are coming new into the market. But the technologies to transition to clean and efficient heating and cooling are really ready for the market to be deployed at scale. It's not necessarily a question of technology innovation alone. There are not so many sectors that have that privilege to have that amount of equipment ready to be scaled. The level here of technology availability is somewhat comparable to power generation. Also, we have, in fact, a huge amount of technological options, equipment options that can be used. Power sector is obviously one where renewables are going from strength to strength. I'm sure Roland will say a couple of words about that as well. It's really up to policymaker to make a strong case here for sustainable heating and cooling equipment so that they can follow in the footsteps of the renewable energy industry. Therefore, a few areas that stand out from our perspective for policymakers to be considered in terms of the approaches they can take in order to reassure investors, in order to make sure that those technologies that are ready to scale come into the market at the pace they could actually do it. We've listed 4 of them here, one being market clarity through long-term policy frameworks to build that confidence that the industry needs. Each and every industry that you talk to that are building different types of clean energy technologies, not only for buildings, but also, say, in the transport sector, in the power sector, etc., in heavy industries, they all have their different demands. But when you talk to the heat pump industry in particular, everything is about market creation. Build the market, the industry will follow. Strong conditions for deployment are needed here, especially related to affordability of the best-in-class equipment, while, of course, advancing innovation in parallel. Third one is raising awareness on the benefits of clean technologies, ensuring reskilling to enable proper installations and operation of such technologies. And finally, of course, as an international organization, I have to say that, but I do also truly believe that building on and expanding existing international collaboration and their commitments is pretty much vital. You all are aware that there was a cooling pledge from over 60 countries at the last COP. 28 countries supported the buildings breakthrough. This goes in addition to the pledges that have otherwise been made, tripling renewables, doubling energy intensity improvements. On our end, we will, of course, continue to support international activities in that space, tracking progress, supporting countries to achieve those priorities and the commitments. And as a maybe slight commercial, if you want, a slight PR, we are about to release a report on the future of heat pumps in China. In fact, led by my 2 colleagues here in the room, together with many Chinese stakeholders, towards the end of March, and will continue supporting many of those existing commitment and pledges, including through the Breakthrough Agenda report. With that, thank you very much for your attention, and thank you, everyone, for joining us here today. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Timo. And then without further ado, we will hand over to Roland to provide an insight on behalf of IRENA. Let me just add to that also in the Global ABC, there is this Clean Heat Forum that was created at the last COP. So I fully agree that we need international cooperation to bring this topic to a successful end. Roland, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Thomas. Thank you very much, Timo. I think I'd say also underlining as what the IEA said to Timo, we see clearly the pathways to decarbonize the energy systems and the technologies are in place. So the main pathway we see to decarbonize the energy system and to bring the emissions down is via renewables, direct use of renewable generation. Also, energy efficiency is important. The electrification and the use of electricity in the end-use sector, the indirect electrification to decarbonize the hard-bait sectors like the shipping sector and the aviation sector and steelmaking and the industry. And then in combination with bioenergy and carbon capture storage and carbon capture use, are the pathway to bring down the CO2 emissions. And let's say the technologies to do this are known. If we look at what we recently did in the EU context here, you see that buildings account for around a third of the greenhouse gas emissions in the European Union. Globally, it would be something between 28 and 30%. The decarbonizing of buildings is one of the biggest challenges towards becoming a climate neutral 2050. That has also been emphasized by the Minister Boucher this morning. The problem is still in front of us. No? So while the technologies are there, the pace to take advantage of these technologies and to encourage ourselves to do the necessary investments is still lagging behind and needs to be happening if we want to achieve the climate neutral buildings by 2015. The decarbonization entails the decarbonization of the construction materials. Decarbonizing of the cement production is still a challenge. There's almost happening nothing. On the electrification with heat pumps, there is a good start already, as we have also seen in the presentation of the IEA. We had a very good start, but it's also so declining because of different reasons. So more push has to come also into use more heat pumps. Reducing the energy demand and energy efficiency for buildings is key. And then a stronger integration of the buildings as part of the entire energy system is key to make the buildings an active block in the energy transition and connect this with other sectors, with the mobility sector, with the heating and cooling sector, and also with let's say, the technologies that are available. So behind the meter, stationary batteries and demand response systems that come through digitalization need to help let's say, the electricity sector to decarbonize, and the electricity sector can then help to decarbonize the buildings. If we look into the IRENA World Energy Transition Outlook and what is currently prepared by the countries and under the membership of IRENA in the so-called planned energy scenario, you see that the emissions still will slightly increase in the building sector, while there is a scenario in the veto, the 1.5 degrees scenario, which will be by 2015, the buildings would be smarter, interconnected, highly energy efficient, and powered and heated or cooled predominantly by renewable energy. A key technology here is the heat pumps. So this would lead to a reduction of 85% in direct CO2 emissions globally coming from buildings. So the steep curve you see, that looks very, very, very promising of what is possible to decarbonize the building sector by 85%. And then the accelerated building renovation rates, efficient appliances, and heat pumps are key to do so. Looking into the direct use of renewables and heat pumps are key. Here we basically have listed the most important technologies and the innovation needed. You see here the conversion technologies top of the list are the low temperature heat pumps, the hybrid heat pumps, the waste to heat to power technology, and high temperature electricity-based application for the industry, where there is a very strong push at the moment to use this in the chemical sector and in the industry. So again, heat pumps are key and the technologies are in place. It's basically now a matter of scaling up and implementing more and also increasing the size of the technology to be able to use heat pumps in the industry sector, in the big chemical companies, and where heat is used for cracking and other technology elements. The key issues towards the decarbonization of building, there is still a long list of things that needs to be overcome. So the existing building stock here, significant share of buildings that have been constructed before the establishment of current energy efficiency standards, they are lagging behind, and let's say these standards need to be implemented for these buildings that have been built before. Financial barriers such as high upfront cost of retrofitting and implementing energy efficiency and integrating renewable energy technologies, so these financial barriers have to be overcome. There are also multiple regulatory barriers that we observe in many of the markets, and let's say the harmonization of the regulations, for instance, across the EU member state, is still hindering a widespread decarbonization. Insufficient policy measures and financial incentives are still missing. Technical barriers in integrating modern decarbonization technologies into the old building stock, a lack of awareness and education. So we still have to do a lot of work around the awareness of what is possible, especially with the older building stock. Grid integration of variable renewable energy, I mentioned this, so using digitalization to create a better interconnection of the buildings and the technologies in buildings through digitalization and grid interconnection with the other sectors, and mainly with the power sector is still an important work to be done. And there is a lack of accurate data availability, so improving the data that are available to go further and develop systematically the building sector is also still missing. On the IRENA side, I mentioned the integration, and integration is not only about technology. In IRENA, we are discussing innovation and technology under 4 aspects. So innovation is more than technology innovation and more as innovation in enabling technologies. It has, let's say, also as integral part innovation in the market design, also innovation in the planning of integrated systems to make sure the sectors are planned together to avoid the planning in a silo, which creates challenges in a later stage and increases the cost of the integration. The business models, in creating business models that are attractive to employ the available technologies is key. And last but not least, building up and overcome the challenges that we are facing now also with the tripling of renewables and the doubling of energy efficiency. The infrastructure is clearly lagging behind. More storage capacity is needed, and a certain part of the storage is also related with storage capacities of building, the link with electromobility, and also linking them behind the storage, behind the metering storage is a key. So this is where we see the perspective. I think it's very much aligned with what the colleagues from the IEA see. The technologies are in place, but we are too slow. We go in the right direction, but we have to speed up and accelerate in the technologies I mentioned. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here on behalf of IRENA. Back to you, Thomas.
Thank you, Roland. If I imagine I came from space and I would land outside this room and I would just drop in here, then I would have to conclude that There seems to be an ambitious target. We want to decarbonize in 27 years, 26 years, and that means for heating technologies, one product generation, right? You install it today, and the product that you install today will last for the whole 26 years, roughly. So we need to start now. Then I'm hearing from Timur and Roland that, yeah, well, basically we have the solutions, and we even know why it doesn't work. So then what stops us? And that's what I would like to discuss with my esteemed panel here. What stops us from going fast enough so that we can achieve the targets? Paula, the President of the European Union has recently suggested, it's not agreed upon yet, but a 90% CO2 emission reduction target by 2040. That's stepping up by one notch. Do you think this is feasible, and which technologies do you think will bring the biggest impact in that? And what role does heating and cooling play, of course?
Thank you, Thomas. Very good to be here with you discussing, even if it's late in the day. What stops us? And is the 90% adding a notch? Let's look at where we want to get, right? We're saying by 2050, climate neutral. So the calculations are pretty easy to do. We have trajectories for 2030. We have a regulatory framework, very detailed and complete. Now, from there to 2050, you just need to do the math. So the 90% is actually a natural result of the overall vision and ambition to be climate neutral by 2050. And therefore, indeed, as we're saying, and Ronald and Timur also just mentioned, and you summarized very well, Thomas, it's today. It should have been yesterday, but it's today that we need to deploy all the technologies that will actually bring us there. There a number of challenges have been mentioned by Roland. So rather than mentioning what is stopping us, I need to, in a constructive way, refer to what is it that we are putting in place to actually allow us to get there. So regulatory barriers, fragmentation of legislation. What are we doing about that? I can tell you there's a whole list which is now there. It's no longer a theory, it's really there, and it starts with the Renewables Directive, where now we have a binding annual target for heating and cooling, which is there. And so I use the opportunity to do some publicity for very new and recent provisions, which will need to be implemented immediately, and we shouldn't even wait for the various pieces of legislation to enter into force. We have the recognition that renewable energy plants should benefit from overriding public interest, including heat pumps, by the way. We have the integration of geothermal and solar thermal energy in the modernized district heating systems. We are asking the transmission system operators, the distribution system operators, to take into account in their planning the potential for district heating and cooling systems. So really making sure that from the planning, because otherwise it's too late if you don't put it in the planning. And this is something that has been overseen, we have to admit. So now it needs to be there. We have from the Energy Efficiency Directive the requirement that in large municipalities, and there are around 11 within these largest municipalities in the EU, should be putting forward local heating and cooling plans precisely to see how we go about it in a structural manner. And now, fingers crossed, we have one final piece of still very crucial legislation, the European Performance of Buildings Directive, to be voted next Tuesday in the plenary in the European Parliament. All of those of you here in the room who are interested in seeing it happening, please still reach out. And then in the Council later. And there we are, the legislation, with the support of member states and the European Parliament, foresees the end of financial support to standalone fossil fuel boilers as of 2025. the financing, not the installation of new, but the financing. We are foreseeing also in the EPBD then policies for a complete phase out of fossil fuels in heating and cooling by 2040 at the latest. So there, that brings us also to 2040. We are asking for information on low temperature heating in the energy performance certificates. And I could go on because this is not an exhaustive list of provisions which are absolutely crucial to have the decarbonization of heating and cooling. And then we have the so-called secondary legislation with the implementation of eco-design on space heaters, which have been mentioned, and then on heating and cooling will come later. A lot of work has been gone into that. So from a regulatory point of view, I believe we are there. From the technologies we heard, we are there. Financing, it's not enough, but the fact is that there are amounts of financing which are unprecedented. Let's be also very, very honest at public level. When you look, for instance, at the recovery and resilience plans from the EU countries, a big share of the big amounts are going into energy efficiency and renovation. So this is good news. We know it's not enough, but it is unprecedented. And of course, now this needs to be leveraged by private capital. It's clear. And therefore, the business case is extremely important because we know there's no investments if there's not a proper business case. But we believe that really also with the technologies which are there and with the clear demand which is there, because we're talking now, or I'm talking of the EU, but we're not alone in the journey, and we've seen. So the market which is being created is a world market.
So then, let's mirror that and what we have heard with industry opinion, because we have two high-level industry representatives from the traditional industry, I would say, and then we have a newcomer. I think it's fair to say that Octopus has come to disrupt the markets a little bit. So we have that, and then we can move a little bit outside of Europe. So Enrique, I guess you can confirm that the technology is ready, but with all this legislation, regulations, directives, is that giving you enough framework to build the market and to accelerate deployment?
First, after the knowledge and the traditional, I'm getting really embarrassed. But I think, first of all, Paula, it's very good to hear those good news. And I think already was said by Timur and Roland. So technology is here. And in fact, if we talk about the concrete Panasonic case, but we have been investing quite a lot to bring those technologies. So it's not about having individual heat pumps. So today, Panasonic is having individual heat pumps made in Czech Republic. We have commercial heat pumps or heat pumps for big dwellings made in France. We have industrial heat pumps made in Italy or in even IT cooling systems. And we are introducing, because also we need to talk about the wasted heat, probably you will talk later. So we are also introducing absorption chillers to cover that part. So technology is here, product is here. Also, I think for us it's very important to consider not only about the technology, it's the application of the technology, because you said about Europe, but Europe is not one Europe. We have many Europes inside Europe, and we need to consider some people is using hydronic systems, some people is using air-to-air systems, some people is using air-to-air systems together with domestic hot water. So we need to consider all those solutions, because that is the way we can really expand quickly the deployment of the heat pump. So we need to keep the variety is really important when we move forward. And then also we talk about type of heat pump. We talk about also about the type of the heat pump, and also we need to consider that each area will need even keeping the F-gas discussion aside. We might need a different type of solution. For instance, if you go to Japan, they will produce hot water by CO2. That is the best way to do it. So that probably will not be the way in Europe. If we go to the south of Europe and you need to install split systems, split air to water, probably you will need R32, because that is the way to do it. And then if you go to the retrofit, I think retrofit, we will all agree, is one of the big markets coming. R290 will provide very high temperature heating. So we need to consider the type of heat pump, we need to consider the use of the heat pump, and we need to use how to produce the heat we want to use. And I think connecting to something Timur said during his presentation, I would like to see heat pump and cooling system coming to one set. Because it's not only that is produced by the same system. So that we need to consider that when it comes to efficiencies, because in the past we used to have one system for heating, one system for cooling, and we are coming to have one single system that will be able to produce efficiently cooling and heating. So that is also efficiencies we need to bring up to the discussion.
Good. Then we have, I think that was a nice segue, heating and cooling. I know that this is something that Andrea loves to talk about, especially because if you need heat, if you need cooling, you get the heat for free. And the key question is, what am I doing with that? Andrea, big and small units.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. And before I do that, because indeed that was my top priority for this talk today, but before I do that, I would just like to very briefly come back to what Paula was saying. It's great to have all of that legislation now in place, but of course it'll only be as good as it will be implemented. So I think there we have a huge task at national level now to really make sure it's going to happen as it should happen, hopefully. But a huge opportunity, of course. And then, yes, I wanted to talk about waste heat and waste heat recovery and the synergies between heating and cooling, because one of the big concerns, I think, that we see is that there is this silo thinking. So you would talk about heating and then you only talk about heating, or you would talk about cooling and then you only talk about cooling, but you don't see the synergies between the heating and the cooling. And one of those synergies is the excess heat or the waste heat that comes from cooling. And that waste heat, of course, can be used again. It can be used again on site, and it can also be used again in a district, in a microgrid, in a bigger district energy network. There are a lot of synergies which are unfortunately not being used at all. And we did, from a Danfoss perspective, I think it was last year, a research and a white paper on the potential of waste heat, and it's just mind-blowing. I wrote down the number. It's 2,860 terawatt hours every year of available waste heat that goes to waste. And that is more or less equivalent to the primary energy consumption of a country like France. So imagine if that waste heat were to be used efficiently, either on site or in a district energy network, then this energy does not need to be produced. It's already there, and it's also in line with anything about what we would say about resource efficiency, because you would use that thermal resource efficiently in that way. And there are many applications actually where you would come across waste heat, like, for example, in supermarkets, like, for example, in hospitals, like, for example, in data centers being a very good example, by the way, because there is a lot of cooling need and there is a lot of waste heat from that cooling, so which is very, very often in most of the cases not used. So many different applications, and many applications actually where you would have a simultaneous need of cooling and of heating. And that's not seen, it's not used, and it's a huge missed opportunity. And the other point I wanted to make, just looking at my notes here, that there is another mind-blowing figure I found, which is from an Agora study, where they found that if you take lower temperature process heat in industries, process heat below 100 degrees C, that heat could also be provided by heat pumps by using waste heat on those sites and upgrading them with heat pumps to the right level. And if you do that, you could replace 20% of the fossil fuels that are being used to provide that heat. So again, another opportunity which we are not really using today. And the problem is, why is that not happening? Why is this waste heat, and why are those synergies not being used? On the one hand side, there is a clear lack of awareness. People just don't know. That's one thing. So there is education and awareness raising needed. But then there is also a clear need for planning, and that goes back to what Paula was saying earlier. I mean, we have now some good hooks with legislation which requires energy planning and heat mapping, if you like. So if this is being done, then of course at least the potential becomes more obvious, and the possibility to use it becomes more obvious as well. So that's one thing. But then there is also a lack of incentives, because why would I do that as a data center, for example? Why would I recover my waste heat, and why would I feed it into a district energy network if I cannot gain anything from that? There is a business case which is yet to be established, and which would help a lot to ensure that deployment. And I can only say from our experience, for example, Danfoss built a new headquarter in Frankfurt, or close to Frankfurt. And there would have been a super opportunity to use the waste heat from the data center there and to feed it into the district energy network. Didn't happen because the utility just didn't see why would they do that. They were just not interested. It was too complicated, no need, no incentive, no financial gain from it. So it doesn't happen. So we also need those, besides the need to plan and to make the potential visible, we also need the incentives and the right business case to make it happen. And I think there are quite a few opportunities to put that into practice. And I would like to end with just one example which shows how feasible it is and how great the benefit can be. We have a small city in Denmark. It's called Sonderborg, and that's where the 2 years ago, I think it was, the energy efficiency conference from the IEA took place. It was then proclaimed the capital of energy efficiency. It's a small city close to the German border, and they committed to become carbon neutral by 2029. And they are halfway through already. And how do they do that? They do that because there is a clear cooperation between public and private sector. There is a master plan which was done between the city and between the citizens, dedicated to different areas of application, where they would sit together and decide together, okay, how are we going to do that? How are we going to plan that? And one important pillar of this planning is the waste heat recovery, is making sure that synergies are being used between the different applications, that industries are run efficiently, that buildings are equipped with energy efficient devices, and that all of this is looked in a holistic way. So it's totally feasible. It's no rocket science. It's just based on those big principles of reducing the energy use, is what we said already earlier, about recovering the thermal energies and using the energies that are available, and then using renewables whenever possible as well. So these three components together, a good planning and bringing public and private sector together, makes it happen without any rocket science. So there is a real opportunity there, which I think we should all use and we should be aware of. And if you want to visit Sonderborg, feel free and let me know. Thank you. It's a nice place.
I have been there. It's indeed very nice. If you want to go by sailboat even, you can. But you dropped a number of statements and of words that could create a perfect segue for Masha. I've heard data centers and Octopus is a data crunching operations, among others, right? I've heard business models, and you probably have a business model in system integration. By the way, we have not heard once so far the question of the electricity price, which I typically mention as the big showstopper. But maybe having access to flexible electricity is the big opening for new business models for players like you, Masha. How do you see this very fast deployment of renewable electricity? We have also heard that electrification will be key. And how do we build a clean heating and cooling sector on top of it?
So great question, and actually the comments that you've all said are just so fascinating and a really, really interesting take on the problem. I'm just going to start with a little story, which is 3.5 years ago, I sat down with a meeting with Greg Jackson, and who's the CEO of Octopus, and he was worried about selling gas. So all the Octopus businesses across Europe sell gas to their customers for heating as well as electricity. And he had had a discussion with the senior management team and said we should stop doing it. And they had a big debate and, well, what are customers going to do? And so he said, well, I can't get out of gas straight away, but I need to create a pathway out. So Octopus then went and bought a heat pump manufacturer in Northern Ireland. And they said, well, what are the key barriers? Heat pumps cost too much. You can't install them quickly. It's hard to do that retrofit because of the existing wet systems, and particularly in the UK, but elsewhere across in Europe. And so he also created an R&D facility and just started working down the list, ticking those things off. So Octopus have launched a new heat pump. It is lower cost, but it's not just about the heat pump. It's actually about that whole system. So it needs to be cheap to buy, but it needs to be cheap to operate. And that means opening up electricity markets so consumers can get the value from flexibility. There are some brilliant countries out there that are open, where consumers are rewarded. It's not universal, and it will be a real blocker when people are using heat pumps in winter. They'll be adding, doubling, tripling, quadrupling the peak. And if you add on the EV peak on top of that, you rapidly see networks have a problem and they need to be able to work with it. You need to make them easy to operate. So we've got a nice, as befits an energy tech company, we've got a nice little app to help do that with customized heating controls. We've got really cheap packages, so with tariffs which are designed for heat pump operation. So there's some standard ones where it's called the double dip. We've got 2 periods of really low-priced operation, so consumers get their heat pumps to do lots of work in those periods. Just before the peak is when there's a nice little low price period. And then it's really high during the peak, and that encourages consumers to let their heating system coast, to turn it off for an hour or an hour and a half or half an hour. And then you sort of recover the cycle. So we have to think about the whole heat pump chain. We also need to think about the whole building. So we have another product so we've worked with housing developers, and we've said, if you design a house, if you put solar panels on, if you put batteries in it, if you put a heat pump in it, and you put in sensible insulation, we'll give customers in that house free energy for 5 years, and that's a guarantee. That's where we need to get to, because we need to move heat pumps from being the sort of, it's a barrier and having to regulate and push it, to that whole consumer pull. We need to get to where we are now with EVs, which is consumers are buying them not because they're green, but because they offer a brilliant product. And they're cheaper to operate than your internal combustion engine. So I, as a private sector company, I feel a huge responsibility, because I think, yes, we need to get volumes up in terms of heat pump production so we can get the economies of scale and that learning experience so we can get costs down. But as the private sector, we also need to be creating that pull and excitement and that whole experience so that consumers want to do this. And I think for the transition, that's absolutely critical. My last comment was, I looked at all the barriers that have been discussed, and I thought, well, if that was me, I wouldn't go into this sector. But you think about anything in life, like running a children's birthday, having a children's birthday party. There are lots of barriers there too, and yet we successfully do it year after year. And I think actually we need to stop talking about barriers. We've just got to go out and do it. We've run out of time.
Wonderful, Masha, wonderful. Great inspiration. So let's look at the other part of the world, because it's always easy to say let's do it here. We hear that China is a delivery partner for many partners in the global value chain. But what I'm missing, but maybe I'm just not informed enough, is what is China doing? What are Chinese cities doing individually to move to clean heating? So Chigao, can you enlighten us on that topic?
Thank you, Thomas. First of all, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the IEA colleagues to give me this opportunity to speak here. Everybody are looking at China. What China's progress is, what China is going on, because its magnitude of emission and I think the role it will play for the global carbon neutrality. Actually, as many of you know, China have did a pledge on the dual carbon pledge, so-called peaking carbon by 2030 and reaching carbon neutrality before 2060. So under this pledge, every sector in China almost publishes their local plans. So China also published a plan called Carbon Peaking Action Plan for the urban-rural construction area. Actually, in that plan, China pledged to reach for the first time, it set an electrification target. That is by 2025, the electrification rate will reach 55%. By 2030, the electrification rate will reach 60%. In primary energy. So the current status is about 52% also in primary energy term. Basically about 1% each year according to the historical data. That means, currently China's building consumes 2.2 trillion kilowatt hours electricity each year. If you electrify 1%, that means 22 billion kilowatt hours per year. So it's truly big. So the national set a goal. Also, we see some actions. One of the action is for the first time, China developed a code called Zero Carbon Zero Carbon Building Technical Code. The code actually take electrification as one of the key pathways to reach zero. Of course, it also offers other alternatives, but so electrification is still the number one priority. It basically to further strengthen the energy efficiency, and based on that, then increase the penetration of electricity and also building load flexibility. Also, we see the government seems to me, to my observation, government is just warming up. Although they set a target, but there is no detailed action plans, implementation plans. It's just warming up. But the market, the local stakeholders, the manufacturers are actually taking actions. There are lots of very innovative solutions delivered, like community level, large-scale district heating by heat pumps, heat pumps combining like solar PV deployment, waste heat recovery by heat pumps in the district heating systems. The penetration is increasing quickly. And the sales of the heat pumps, for example, in last year, although Thomas said that Europe has a drop, right? But China has a double-digit increase, especially in the air-to-water heat pump sale. So these are just some of the positive side, if we can say these are positive. So maybe I can share a little bit of concerns and challenges later on. So overall, to sum up, I think it is reasonable to believe that China is on the pathway towards electrification. Although we certainly hope it's speed up, accelerate. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernst Yao. That is good to hear, indeed. And now we could actually ask, is Ghana, is Africa on the way to electrification? It's the country with probably the highest solar irradiation on every given day, so one could be surprised that is not already the case. But we had that discussion before, and you said, Thomas, you're simplifying dramatically. So what is the complexity of decarbonizing Ghana, and maybe also in the context of the probably much bigger demand for cooling?
Right, so thank you very much, and I'll say thank you and good, it's evening now, so good evening to everyone, and congratulations to the organizers of the program. Thomas, I think in our pre-discussion, it's important for the audience to understand that the situation in Europe seems to be quite different, totally different from what is happening in Africa. And whilst you are talking about heat pumps and, how to warm yourselves, the radiation in Africa is way too much. And so we are rather looking at how to cool ourselves. And that's the irony. That whilst people are cooling here and trying to find heat, we have so much heat that we are trying to cool ourselves. And so it has gotten to a stage where cooling is no more a luxury, because in some cases, you had to belong to a certain economic class to own an air conditioner. Now it's more like a necessity, and homes are gradually trying to find a way forward to get these cooling devices in there. Now, from the government perspective, and I speak from the perspective of a regulator, the Energy Commission, what we have tried to do is to try to put policies in place. And some of these policies are basically looking at coming up with a building code. And this building code has been developed in Africa. Ghana has a building code now. And not trying to reinvent the wheel, but basically adapt international standards. However, when it comes to designing, because of the particular situation we have, we've realized that some specific materials have to be used in terms of designing these buildings. We also have the regulations on buildings, and that is where the specifics are there. Unfortunately, it is always difficult when you see that institutions that are mandated to do things like this are working in silos, And I heard you talk about how do we integrate these ideas into our strategy, our planning strategy. You are developing an energy plan for the country, and yet you are not considering how, the intensity or energy use of buildings is going to impact on that. So we have tried as much as possible to use what we call institutional collaboration. How do we work with institutions that are mandated on their own to do individual things, and make sure that we find it in the built environment space, trying to create the necessary policy documents available, trying to use the necessary agencies to come up with permitting regimes to help these buildings be more efficient. Now in Europe, you have a lot of your buildings here, dating back to the centuries. And so in Africa, it is quite different. I'm sure in the next 30 years, the most efficient buildings have not even come up yet. So we have a lot to learn in terms of the kind of buildings that we should be putting up now. Because in your case, you are retrofitting some of these buildings. We are yet to put up these buildings. So there is no need reinventing the wheel. You look at what are some of the things that can be done. How do we put these buildings in place to be able to, serve the purpose? How do we also find, most importantly, the equipment that are going to be in these buildings? And that jumps to the kind of equipment that are being stored in the buildings. We realize that the air conditioners that are currently coming into Africa, are very, very, very substandard. Also because there are no regulations. Also because people are complaining about the initial cost. So you have very used, obsolete appliances that are ending their life, somewhere in part of the world, that are finding their way in Africa. And these equipments are going to be installed in the building. So at the end of the day, what have we done? We have put in an efficient structure in terms of brick and mortar, but the equipment that are going to be used in these buildings are obsolete or probably new but inefficient. And so that brings me to a campaign that we have been running on trying to stop dumping of used, obsolete appliances, and most importantly, new inefficient appliances with, high GWP refrigerants, because this is something that is really, really, really affecting us. And we think that if we work together, that should be able to help. There is always this mantra that, you can just get it and fix it there. But as we said, you have done the very necessary things by coming up with the structure, but even the equipment that will be stored in these buildings are going to be very high consuming. And at the end of the day, we achieve nothing with this. So these are my initial submissions in terms of what we are doing as regulators. Institutional collaboration, very key, and then also sharing the responsibility to stop the dumping of inefficient appliances with high GWP. Thank you.
Thank you, Hubert. And to my dismay, time has passed a little bit too fast in this session because we had a number of additional questions foreseen. I'm afraid we will not be able to ask them anymore. I would also still like to give you all a 30 seconds window to reflect on what the other panelists have said, and then we hand over to Paul for the final remarks. And could we also please have the second Slido question up and running so that we see what the audience thinks, because I wanted to ask you also more questions, but that will have to be postponed to another time. So should I just go maybe from the middle so that it's not Hubert that talks again? Masha, do you have 30 seconds? Like, what's your reflections on what you have heard so far? And then we go to Chigao, Paul, and then jump back here to Andrea, Enrique, and Paula.
So I'm going to build on two things, because I think we definitely need these sort of clear regulatory long-term plans for how we are going to get from where we are now to where we need to be. And I think we need to make sure that they are achievable. If you get that framework, you then need to drive, you need industry and the private sector to drive that forward. And I think, for me, I think that's the absolutely critical thing. And I think we've also got to take individual responsibility. If you all went out and got 5 people to install a heat pump, and they got 5 more people, you've just hit exponential growth. And actually, we will get to exponential growth in heat pumps the same way as we have with EVs. EVs probably hit that inflection point, within the last 2 years, depending on the European country. Heat pumps will get there.
I truly like the idea of a snowball effect for heat pumps. Chigao, what?
Yeah, I think for like the situation in my country, like in China, we need to figure out what does a carbon neutral heating vision look like, or heating solution look like. Maybe some of my colleagues will say, okay, heat pumps, just heat pumps. But we have to be careful, some of the regions in China, Russia, East Europe, they have huge, we call it centralized district heating, or centralized heating, or district heating. So those are quite different. There's still not a good consensus what will be the pathway to decarbonize those systems. But we definitely, we cannot wait. We need to build consensus and give a clear vision and pathway. Also, I would like to respond to one of the colleagues just mentioned how to motivate the recovery of heat. That's a very good question. You know, the situation in China is, in some of the pilot, the power plant keep like discarding the waste heat. It costs nothing because they have to put it, just release it into air. But once you trying to use that to do the heating, then they start charging you money. And it becomes makes the business model unviable.
Good.
So
we have to
once
come to an end.
10 seconds maybe. But what about an idea? You know, waste heat is a pollution. Why don't you can tax air pollution? Why don't we tax heat pollution? You know, if we can implement a policy like that, everybody will try to find a way to, you know, to remove their waste heat by paying money.
We note down, we make thermal pollution a waste. Will then be governed under waste legislation.
Yeah.
Yes?
Okay.
So let's
I'll stop
see.
here.
Thank you very much. Hubert, that would also help you get more efficient products into Ghana, right? If inefficiency means we're wasting heat, then you're not allowed to.
Yes, of course. And just to agree that at the end of the day, we are looking at, I mean, Europe has just passed its F-gas regulation, you know. So what are we going to do with some of these waste that is coming from, you know, the heating per se? But uniquely, there are other things that can be done, you know, capturing the heat from this waste to do something else. You know, either you try to generate something out of it. But I think that generally we should be innovative. We should see what we can do in situations like that. Taxing as an option, as he mentioned, but what else can we do, you know, to be able to use these equipment? And my worry is just about how do we share that responsibility?
So that's something to reflect upon for the rest of the evening. Thank you very much, Hubert. Andrea?
Yeah, thank you. Maybe just on Ghana and on the...
No, but you have 30 seconds.
Yes.
So
I will. On Ghana as an example, and taking this example for the need for planning, because I think it really starts with planning, and it's not only about individual air conditioners if we need cooling, it's also about seeing where do we need that cooling and can we combine it, and can we perhaps also use a district cooling, because we were talking about district heating, the same goes for district cooling. And whether it's district heating or district cooling, it all starts and ends with the right planning in place, because then we see where the needs are, and then we can also use the synergies between the heating and the cooling. And I certainly noted down tax heat pollution. I find that really an interesting concept, even though taxing is difficult on a European level, but the thinking behind it, that we don't let things go to waste, I think that thinking is really important, and we should take it into account.
Yeah, my final opinion is, I think we have products, we have different type of solutions, traditional, non-traditional solutions, but I would like to call for point number one, we need from Europe give clear signal, fossil fuel is finished. We cannot hesitate there. Second point, we need to have clear prices. So it cannot continue that electricity is much, much more expensive, even more that we cannot subsidize the fossil fuel. Third point, we need to have clear frameworks. We need to give clear frameworks to the people. And for instance, if I go very quickly to district heating, for instance, we cannot create expectations that cannot be fulfilled. Denmark case, if you have district heating, you cannot access to heat pump. When the district heating will be made, nobody knows. So we cannot continue having this type of clear frameworks. And then the final point, infrastructure. So it cannot happen that in Netherlands we cannot sell more heat pumps because we cannot build more buildings because there is no electricity. So 4 points. clear policy, infrastructure, and tariffs.
We have a very demanding moderator, so no time for niceties. So what we've seen, decarbonization of the heating and cooling comes with benefits for the climate, for the consumers, for energy security, and for industry. So let's address these opportunities or address the challenges while we seize these opportunities, and we are addressing the challenges as we speak. So I think we are on a good path. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope I was not too demanding, but I had the fear. When we had the preparation call already, that was good. So I thought normally when that is good already, then the discussion on stage will also be good. So I hope that all of you take the opportunity to talk to my distinguished panel here. Thank you very much for your contributions. I took many notes, and now I'm very keen to hear, Paul, what you have to summarize or to add to the discussion that we had so intensively here over the last 70 minutes. Please.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Just let me take about 3 or 4 minutes in closing remarks, if I may, and sincere thanks to the event organisers, our co-organisers, our hosts, the various French ministries, the Global Alliance for Building and Construction, on behalf of the UN Environment Programme. So sincere thanks also to our initiative partners, the heating and cooling industry, and those countries supporting the global transition in the buildings and heating and cooling sector. On behalf especially of UNEP's Climate Change Division in Paris, and to all the participants and contributors today. So we highly appreciate the opportunity and all the ongoing efforts of everyone involved to progress energy efficiency and the global climate change agenda together. So we have an ongoing triple worldwide crisis in the environment: a pollution crisis, a nature crisis, and of course a climate crisis. And they're all combined, and this makes the challenge of building a globally sustainable energy system all the more difficult. So the earlier new, more eco-efficient and more sustainable technologies and practices are put into mass usage, the sooner the energy transition and the sooner the unlocking of the trillions available in economic savings for all consumers, all businesses, and all governments everywhere. And to enable the green investment in our sustainable buildings, infrastructure, and new energy systems at a much faster rate, we need to follow through on the recent outcomes of COP28, which we've just heard of, the tripling of renewable energy, the doubling of the rate of progress in energy efficiency, and to implement the Global Cooling Pledge. So more strategically focused national programs on green technology procurement through public and institutional purchasing. I didn't hear mention of that today. I think it's really important. The green public procurement, developing emerging economies spend a huge amount of their national money on institutional purchasing at the public level. We of course need the national level market-focused equipment and infrastructure transformation programs. And they are needed for all the main solution sectors, so we need to focus on the technology solutions, and we've heard that today. And it can be achieved by working together much more. And this is internationally. From where we sit at the UN, we can see that in terms of, say, sustainability and, of course, climate stability, this cannot be achieved by one country on its own or one region on its own. We need a multilateral approach. So the new global sustainable energy system will bring very large economic benefits, which we know, which is a win-win, as I mentioned, for every citizen, every business, every government, in every economy. And of course, not least emerging economies where demand for buildings and heating and cooling in particular is rising rapidly. So the new sustainable energy system will bring much more predictable energy supply, more water and food security, more affordable electricity, more energy price stability, more jobs, and much more economic development, as well as resource efficiency and circularity, and clean air, and no or low greenhouse gas emissions. So as we've heard, growing our energy efficient buildings, heating and cooling markets can save more than half of all climate pollution for the achievement of the Paris Agreement. We saw a very good slide from our Arena colleague earlier. as well as saving hundreds of billions for each and every country, delivering the clean, pollution-free energy we need across the continents. The entire global electricity system, including in every developing region, will treble over the next 30 years. And we heard mention of this from China in terms of progress, significant progress on the electrification. And it represents a major economic and social development opportunity to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Billions of new lights, new heating systems, new cooling appliances, and new electrical equipment products of every type are added to the global stock every 10 years. So we have a huge opportunity to make these products and the electricity distribution system itself much more efficient and sustainable. And we have a clear opportunity to make the new global energy system more efficient by working together. Much more cooperation, sharing the experience of what works, and enabling consumer market-facing policies and programs to bring sustainable energy and infrastructure for all. It's the cornerstone of the new 21st century clean energy system. So sincerely, thank you very much for your attention and participation. Have a good evening in Paris. Handing back to Thomas.
I think we took away a lot of inspiration for this evening. That could be good discussions over dinner. Thank you very much for coming, all of you. Thank you again to the speakers and panelists. And I wish you a good evening and a good day tomorrow. Thank you.